We continue this series of sermons on Paul's letter to the Ephesians as I seek to explore what Paul was pointing at. Paul was a mystic after all, and somehow when I was in my evangelical days, I seem to have missed that along the line. And so I'm finding it interesting to explore different dimensions of Paul's writing. I'm going to stay with this first chapter, this beginning, this great benediction, because there's a lot in it. We're just going to be doing it for several weeks. I'm not even sure exactly how long, but today we're going to focus on just one part of the third verse, and that is that God has blessed us in Christ with every spiritual blessing. That's Paul, the beginning of Paul, saying the wonderful things about the nature of the divine in our lives. So this sermon is actually part of a series that's been going on every once in a while for the last 20 years. I call the sermon series A Christian Response to Things My Friend Eric Has Said. Eric was the senior watchmaker at Tiffany & Company when I was there, and we became good friends. He taught himself watch repair after he had escaped Austria as a young Jewish man just before the war, and also escaped from one of the camps in France. And he had sort of a stoic philosopher kind of approach to him. So he would say things like this. Democrats don't really care about the poor. They're just the cheapest constituency to buy. I'm sure I am a moral man with honesty and tact, and no one's more surprised than I to see the way I act. And one of his favorites, especially when talking to me, apparently was change is rare, by which he meant change is pretty much non-existent. Now, Eric's been gone for a year now, but this last year has certainly provided a lot of fodder for him had he wanted to keep making the point to me that change is rare or really non-existent. Anti-Semitism has been on the rise. It's something that concerned him a great deal in the latter years of his life. Actually, hatred based on fear of the other is on the rise everywhere. I mean, it just seems like the amount of human cruelty that's being brought onto people, just innocent people, is just staggering. It really makes you wonder about whether there is anything like progress. And it's not like the U.S. is off the hook, you know. I mean, we bombed a hospital not too long ago. And what disturbs me is that apparently we don't think we need to be held accountable. We're not going to allow for an international investigation, something independent. Instead, we are having one of our own generals figure out what happened. It seems like, power will do whatever it is power wants to do. And change isn't likely to come that way. Change certainly isn't likely to come in a gridlocked Congress, and Congress seems to be fine with that. Now, it would be very easy to just blame those Republicans. I mean, they're just trying to shut everything down. But I can almost hear Eric's voice saying, conservatives don't want change. Liberals want change, but not now. Gridlock happens because human beings don't seem to want to push ahead and progress into something new and different. We just resist change. Now, the world may seem static, but I'd like to think that at least I could change. I mean, I talk about change and development and growth enough. You'd figure that I could change. And yet it seems like year after year, I'm facing the same internal obstacles, taking things personally that maybe aren't meant personally, tripping over my own desire to make an impact in the world. I meet those things at different levels and face those things and think I have emerged and rid myself of some of them, but they come back. Change is rare, it would seem. But maybe not quite as rare as we think. I mean, we and the first readers of this letter from the Apostle Paul seem to look at change, or seem to look at the world and its static nature as something that we had to face, that we had to confront. You look at the world and the things that are going on, and we can't quite imagine how we're going to change it, how I'm going to change my internal obstacles, or how we're going to change the incredible cruelty that just seems to be erupting all over the globe. And Paul could see that, and, in his worldview, he thought what was going on was that there were spiritual forces involved here. There was some sort of spiritual war going on, so that there were forces arrayed against us that would keep us from being able to make the kind of developmental leaps and growth steps that we'd like to make. He talked about that spirit world throughout the letter, and we tend to be more materialist in the way we look at things. So we look at human nature, we look at the structure of the brain, we understand how we've evolved and therefore how our emotions work and how our reactions operate. We look at the past and it seems to determine the future in a materialist kind of world. So, Paul sees something static, or at least sees how it can be static, as do we, when we look at our own lives and our own ability to be able to make change. But Paul saw something more. He recognized that God blesses. Now, blessing is an active word. It's a word that sets things in motion, like in the beginning of the Bible, let there be light, and there was light. It sets creation in motion. Like at the beginning of a semester, an academic dean calls the academic year into session, and it sets something in motion. It's intended to set the learning in motion. Blessing is something that doesn't come from within us. It's something that moves through us and carries us forward. It's the activity of God, is what Paul is saying. That yes, there are these spiritual forces arrayed against us, or we would say materialist forces arrayed against us, but there is creative power. I'll call it the evolutionary impulse, the love intelligence of the universe. That creative power is nevertheless moving forward, making changes. That is the good news. And that's what Paul sees. That's what his spiritual imagination is open to, recognizing that in a world where it seems static, where there are these forces arrayed against us, that nevertheless, the God of creation, the God of love, is unfolding something fresh and new within each one of us. You are blessed with a spiritual blessing. And I think it's ours then to respond, because that's the way with blessing. Something begins, a word sets it in motion, but then we need to respond and carry through if we're to move into these steps of growth and development that are sitting right in front of our eyes. And the challenge, I think, is to see them, to recognize them. And so my challenge to you this week is to each night sit down and ask yourself, where have you seen blessing? Where have you seen some moment where there seems to be a shift that could carry things forward if you took advantage of it? Can you see the activity of the divine? Can you see the evolutionary impulse carrying us forward? It's usually in the midst of conflict, and then it comes from somewhere as a surprise. It's novel, transcends and includes. It is increasing complexity. These are the movements of God's blessing in our life. And I think if we get used to looking at them or looking for them, we will operate more from a stance of hope. And that's what Paul wanted his people to do. He wanted to recognize what God was about, so they would realize that they were blessed in Christ, that is, in this matrix of creation that is moving towards beauty and unity. He wanted them to see that they are an agent in that work, just as you are, and just as I am. That's where our hope comes from.